I'm Solana Rice, the co-founder and co-executive director of Liberation in a Generation, a national movement support organization building the power of people of color to totally transform our economy. Who controls it, how it works, and more importantly, for whom? I'm excited to guest edit this edition of The Forge, an online journal on organizing strategy and practice by and for organizers, along with the co-directors of Black Visions, Candace Montgomery and Miski Noor. We'll be looking back at the uprisings last summer and the long movement to defund and abolish the police and prison industrial complex. I'm here today with Syrus Ware and Dara Baldwin. Syrus is an artist, researcher, youth advocate, and educator, as well as a core team member of Black Lives Matter Toronto. He's currently working on a PhD at York University, where he's looking at the experiences of Black disabled artists. Dara is the Director of National Policy for the Center for Disability Rights, a center for people with disabilities to go to for services and advocacy. We're talking about the relationship between disability justice and the movement to abolish prisons and police. Listen in. I would love to just hear from your perspective about your past year, and maybe a bit about how you think this moment is unique.
What a year. What a year. So as an activist and an organizer on the front lines, this year has been an incredible one. I've been an abolitionist for 25 years. I mean, that's 25 years of trying to start a conversation with anybody who would listen about the possibility of abolition and having every single conversation shut down with, but what about the really bad people? Like, people just could not engage with this conversation. And then suddenly in April of 2020 and May of 2020 and June of 2020, everybody's an abolitionist and everybody is talking about abolition. I'm reading about it in Cosmopolitan magazine. It seems like it was on everybody's lips. So to me, I wake up, I can't believe the world that I'm waking up into, to be able to have these conversations about abolition and finally get to the actual work of imagining the kinds of worlds that we're trying to build together. That was what we were trying to do in the 90s and in the 2000s when people were shutting down the conversation before we could even begin. We were trying to get to the dream stage, the saying, what does this community look like? How do we respond to conflict, crisis, and harm? What would that look like? We couldn't get to that conversation because people were so afraid. And now we're in a moment where people are dreaming, and they're imagining, and they're building, and they're creating, and they're already living as if we were already there. They're living abolitionist lives right now in this moment. So to me, this year has been incredible. The uprisings of the summer, I'm going to call the revolution. This is a revolutionary moment. Revolution is not a one-time event. It's a process. It's an ongoing process. We are in the middle of a revolutionary moment. And so in the middle of this revolutionary moment, we have the possibility to plant a whole bunch of seeds as the system changes. As the system changes and something new starts to grow, we get to plant new seeds of what we want to see growing in the place of the old. And we also get to water the seeds of our ancestors who also were planting seeds of abolition. The abolition of slavery was not finished. It was continued through the prison system, slavery. And so, this was only negatively abolished. So continuing the work of finally abolishing slavery through the abolition of police and prisons is part of the work that we're doing right now. We're watering the seeds of our ancestors. So anyways, we are in this moment of change. We are in this moment of possibility. Octavia said, look, in the future, everything's going to change. And as soon as you get used to it, it's going to change again. And she was right. She wrote about the now in 1993 in Parable of the Sower, and she predicted it so accurately. As soon as we get used to one thing, it changes again. So we're in a moment of profound change and possibility. So this year for me has been a year of possibility because suddenly we get to have these beautiful, brilliant conversations about building the kind of world that we want to live in, this freedom that we are so close to. So I think we're going to have abolition in our lifetime. I think this year is a watershed. This is a catalytic moment. This is a revolutionary moment. And this year, this is the year that we're going to remember that everything changed.
Yes, yes. I'm all of that, ditto, and all of that. But no, I'm going to say the same thing, Syrus. Yeah, it has been catastrophic and illuminating, right? The emotions going so, all kinds of ways. To be someone who has to stay in her home at all. I was never home. I would do 3 cities in 1 week. That's the other thing, right? My policy work is from the streets to the suites, not the other way around. It is us who tells them what to do. And so I would be able, I'm blessed to travel the country and travel the world and talk to people. That immediately stopped. I live in DC. My family's from New York, New Jersey. I'm from Newark, New Jersey, Brick City. And then my family's in Brooklyn and New York and Manhattan. And I would go up once a month to see my father still there and friends, my godchildren, all that. That stopped. I haven't seen people in a year. So it's been very emotional for me. That, and then watching people get sick, and then watching people die at such large rates, and people losing so many important people in their lives. That has been very emotional for me. But then, as Syrus said, on the other side, I'm blessed that I still have a job, and a job that is about change. And I'm with Syrus. I remember talking about abolitionism. As I said, I come from Newark, New Jersey. My mom was a staunch Black Panther. My mom was a staunch activist. My father, even though he was in law enforcement, his thing was security. He never once pulled his gun, and he did what he needed to do to protect his community. But my parents, my grandfather used to take the van and drive people to vote. That's a family I come. You can't come from New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey, and not be political. So I knew abolitionism, right? I mean, Imara Baraka is right, Newark, New Jersey, right? So, right, going to the library on Saturdays and listening to him speak and listening to abolitionists speak. And right, having that, oh, please, that'll never happen. And my parents also taught me to never live in people's possibilities, create your own possibilities. And when someone tells you something can't work, you're talking to the wrong person, move on to someone else. And that's what I constantly did, right? And so it has been illuminating to see this happening and see this change. Everything Syrus said, the other part that I will say is it has also been interesting to see white folks actually stop and listen, specifically around policy. It is white people who rule these tables here in DC. Don't let anybody fool you. Even the Black groups, their boards are white folks sit on their boards, white folks fund them, and it is a white-centered conversation around the work they do. And so when it comes time for them to stand up for Black folks, it's really hard for them, or to be there for Black folks and have the courage behind that. It's really difficult because it's white folks who are running the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, right? Their board is white folks. And finally having them see and say, like, even within quote unquote progressive social justice movements and circles here in DC and around the country, you white people who think you're progressive are not. You're just as racist, and them finding out, knowing the difference between covert racism and overt racism. Just because you don't burn a cross in front of your house don't mean you're not a racist in the things that you do. So that's been interesting to watch. And then the other side of it has been interesting to watch is us telling them, move out the way and let us lead. You all are no longer in charge. So that's been quite interesting. And specifically in disability community, having the hashtag Black Disabled Lives Matter coming out of this work is amazing to me. And actually, seeing some white disabled activists admit they had a problem, but in general, they still have not. You still get white disabled people who say, I cannot possibly be racist because I'm disabled. And I'm like, oh no, are you kidding me? No, this cannot exist. So we're just slowly there, but I will say that it has been amazing to see Black disabled queer, Black disabled women leading this talk and this conversation around how the disability rights community, and I'm using air quotes for those you can't see me, rights is an air quote, has treated Black disabled people for years, and BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color, and those who are multi-marginalized, a word which I put together because I watched for years where these white disabled people will tell young, marginalized disabled people, you can't pick your other marginalization over your disability. So they would say, you have to be disabled first, then a Black woman second. And I was like, oh, you can't do this to these. Wait a minute now. And I never understood that. So anyway, so multi-marginalized is you are marginalized, many of us, right? You have an African-American, a Black, trans woman who is a refugee, who's formerly incarcerated, who's disabled. They are there, they exist. And you can't have them choose which marginalization is more important in their life. As Syrus said, the revolution is not only flowing as far as time is concerned, right? A beginning, a middle. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to all things, right? And we in the middle of that. But it is also flowing in the marginalizations that people live in their lives. Because there's the start of a revolution, but it doesn't include Black disabled folks. It didn't. Now it does, right? It didn't include queer, LGBTQ. Now it does, right? So there's a flow in that as well, as far as who is involved and who is in the mix of that revolution. And it has been wonderful to see that change.
That's one of the things that is so amazing, is that because Black Lives Matter. I mean, I guess I can really just speak from the Canadian context, but Black Lives Matter Toronto, Black Lives Matter Canada has always positioned itself as a disability justice group. It was a group that was specifically calling out the ways that Black mad people in particular were being killed here in Toronto. Andrew Loku, Regis Krasinski-Paquette, I mean, the list grows and grows. We've always positioned ourselves as a disability justice group. When this revolution kicks off, and Black Lives Matter is well positioned to say, we're going to make some demands here around policing. We're going to make some demands around abolition. Those demands are necessarily rooted in disability justice. So I thank you for saying that about just, it's never Black disabled people who were imagining at the front of the revolution. Well, honey, this time it is, that is what is happening. We have folks like Raven Wings, this Black trans woman who's disabled, speaking out and giving that powerful speech that was heard around the world, where she's like, I just want to say something, how are we still talking about statues when people are losing their lives here, And so we have this visible queer and trans disabled Black leadership in this movement for Black lives right now. And it is making the conversation intersectional necessarily. And I am so here for it, And so I'm thankful. I'm thankful for this moment.
You have both mentioned sort of sowing seeds and the changes that have culminated into this moment. I want to know how do we know that we're sowing the right seeds, or which seeds that we need to water? And based on your vision of safety, especially for people of color living with disabilities, what would replace policing and imprisonment? What's your vision of safety, and how do we know that the seeds that we're sowing and watering are leading to that vision? And maybe, Dara, we'll start with you, because I do think this has to do with the Policing and Justice Act as well.
Oh, sure. So again, the possibilities are endless. So I'll say this, as I said before, I take my policy from the streets to the suites. I'm going to talk about possibilities. I do not think there's one, right? There's multiple possibilities. And I think that the solutions come from the communities, and each community in this country is different, and each community is going to have their own changes, right? What's going to make things different. But I will say fundamentally in those changes is the investment in Black people and in Black lives, and in the ways in which people's lives are changed, right? Through education, through transportation, through housing, through employment, through environmental care, right? Those are the bases. Everybody talks about that. But what does that look like? And you're right. Are we watering the right seeds? Is a very good way to look at it. I think many of us have planted the correct seeds, and I think we're watering the correct things. There are some who are getting water who should not get water, and we need to start saying that. When people are doing wrong by us, we have to start saying, sorry, you're not doing this right, and we need to not cut off their water, but maybe change their water. Maybe they don't get the nutrients they should be getting, right? Okay, because I don't believe in that either. But so we have to do that. when you said the justice and police, I'm going to do something else. So I also work in transportation, and in transportation, they have the E of enforcement. And many people have never really made this connection. I'm the co-chair of the Transportation Equity Caucus, and we have a project to say, remove the E of enforcement out of transportation. NPR and some others have done research and studies. When Black and brown people are harmed or killed by the police, 25% of those encounters are through traffic stops. 25%, right? And there's funding and money that goes to programs within DOT. Everyone's looking at the DOJ. Law enforcement gets money through multiple ways, right? And we need to start looking at it. So we've asked Congress to look at that DOT money. It's in the 402, 405, and 1906 programs through NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. It goes to police unions and administrations, and nobody looks at it. They're not held accountable for what they do with that. And that would be those roadblocks when you're doing drunk driving, right? Roadblocks, MAD, right? Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They have a tagline that enforcement is the only way, right? So we need to start paying attention to how E and enforcement is being used, okay? And how that's being done. And so it's done in many different ways. So I just wanted to say that, and solutions to that is that, just like in that, solutions to that is create, right, stops the surveillance of cameras. People always go, especially in the United States, to punitive actions, to being punitive, that if you cause someone harm, they will do better. So in this case of law enforcement, right, is if you're speeding, they put up speed cameras and say, oh, if we get them and give them tickets and make them pay money, they'll stop speeding. That's a white-centered thought. That is what structural racism is about. That is back to the founding of this country. That is what the slave master did to the slaves. Beat these slaves and they will act right, right? They used the slave, right? When they enslaved us. And that didn't work. And that's not what you do, right? If you do this, they won't run away. And that didn't work. And it stays within white folks and how they come up with solutions to problems, is that if we harm them, they'll do better. It didn't work on the war on drugs. It didn't work on the war on poverty. Every time they got to do something with war, and fighting. And who gets harmed? Black and brown folks. Instead of having speed cameras which surveillance Black bodies, and which those speed cameras are only put in Black neighborhoods, instead of having police officers on corners, do something different. And many communities have figured out how to do this. One community actually in San Francisco, in an area where they had a lot of speeding, and they decided to have classes and conversations with the neighborhood and say, you need to stop speeding through here because this is where the kids go back and forth to school before the pandemic. And you know, where elderly people go to the senior citizens place and have fun. There's a park here. They used the unhoused and said, hey, if you come here every morning and get a yellow vest and hold this sign up and say, slow down, because our kids are walking, we'll give you $50 a day. And that's only if they wanted to come. And they came and they did that, and the neighborhood, and it slowed the speeding down. The people said, oh, we're going to do better by these children, right? Instead of giving out tickets and having people lose pay from work, or they couldn't come in to fight their tickets. This all goes together. They can't come in to fight the ticket because we have no paid leave act. We all fighting over here for paid leave act. They have no vacation time, right? All of these things are connected. So there are many different ways in which to find solutions, and I leave that to communities who do this. But what I will say is that when you come towards your solutions, we must start using love and care and not being punitive and harmful. That does not create community, nor does it create solutions that are long-term, where people can not only live, but thrive and survive. And so that's how I see these things should be happening. We should stop being punitive, stop being harmful, stop using white supremacist ways to resolve our solutions, to resolve our problems, to find solutions.
Thanks for that. And I think it's really important to highlight the nooks and crannies. You know, sometimes all this transportation money, for example, just people, their eyes glaze over, but this is actually where places get built, where design gets racist, where all the things that sort of magically seem to happen, they don't magically seem to happen. They're designed. Syrus, I'm curious for you, your vision of safety for people of color living with disabilities, what replaces policing and imprisonment?
Well, this is the thing is that there are so many options. We know that police do not keep our communities safer or more secure. We know that prisons do not keep our communities safer or more secure. The origin of the police force was the slave patrols that were designed to go and catch Black people and to bring us to slave labor camps. The origin of the RCMP here in Canada and Northern Turtle Island was to grab and to catch Indigenous people and to disappear them from the land as a way of fueling settler expansion. We know that that is the origin, and that is what continues today. So they're not on the streets actually to protect us or to keep us safe. That's not what's happening. Instead, there's this targeted policing that's resulting in extreme brutality that particular parts of our community are facing at a disproportionate rate. And in particular, Black mad people are being killed at a disproportionate rate over and over again during these so-called wellness checks or during these interactions in public space, where mad people are just being mad in public space and being killed for it. So what replaces policing? We have so many options and so many possibilities. We know that we can change the structural issues in society that create the conditions where harm begins to happen. So we need to address white supremacy. If we dismantled white supremacy, if we had Indigenous resurgence, if we had Black affirming spaces where Black lives mattered, we would necessarily be creating safer communities, communities where we all were able to thrive. The Combahee River Collective said in the 1970s, if we make the world safer for Black women, we are necessarily making the world safer for everyone. And so if we made the world safer for Black trans women with disabilities, we would necessarily be making the world safer for everyone. So that would be one way of sort of addressing the root causes of some of the things that we face in our society. We can create housing programs so that everybody has housing. We can make sure that everybody has access to food. We can make sure that there's a safe supply of drugs that are not contaminated. We can decriminalize sex work. We can address conflict, crisis, and harm in new ways. We can create MAD-led community supports that respond to crisis calls when MAD people need more support. That are designed and created by MAD people themselves, particularly when we're well, to set up a system that works for us when we're in crisis. You know, we can teach our children about conflict resolution from a young age and teach them how to de-escalate and how to work through conflict and how to solve problems without relying on the state or calling in, some sort of punitive measures to resolve conflict. So there are all of these strategies that we could do in order to start to build networks of care within our communities that allowed us to take care of each other and that would root safety in our hands. You know, where we would be responsible for caring for each other and making safer environments. The reality is that the prison and policing system, we have this fallacy that they are doing all of this work, and they're not. You know, when they respond to wellness checks, they kill us regularly. When they respond to mad people in public space, they shoot first and then respond. You know, the majority of tasing reports in the Toronto Police Services, 53% of all tasing is at mad people. It's mad people. 53% of all people being tased are mad people. So they respond first with violence because of their samenism, because of their fear of mad people. So we know that the police are not particularly responding well to crisis. They don't respond to harm particularly well in cases where harm has happened. Rarely do people say, "Oh, I really need to go to the police in case of sexual violence." The police do terrible. First of all, they are perpetrators of sexual violence more often than not, but they also respond terribly in cases of sexual violence in ways that re-traumatize the folks who have experienced the violence. So much so that very few people feel comfortable going to the police. There are, thousands of untested rape kits. There are so many examples of the ways that they actually don't take sexual violence seriously in any way, and in fact, support it in so many ways in our society. So they're not responding to harm particularly well, and and they don't respond to conflict. When there's a conflict and they arrive, things escalate. Things become much larger. If you're in a fight and suddenly the police arrive, suddenly everything's a big issue, and they escalate. So they're not doing what we think they're doing, and we know that we could do so much better. Now, Dr. Vivian Salahana, who's writing out of Rhode Island and writes a lot and thinks a lot about abolition, and writes this beautiful article, The Black Feminist Ontology, Revisiting the Ghosts of Abolition, that breaks down this myth of the dangerous few that we supposedly need prisons for. But she says that, one of the problems with our current system is that we're expected to provide an elaborate roadmap of what we're going to do instead of police and prisons in order to get out of this violent system that we find ourselves in. And she relates this prison and policing system to an abusive relationship. And she says it's in this abusive relationship that we're trying to leave, that we're being told, prove to me that you can do this without me. Prove to me how you're going to solve your problems without me. You can't do this without me. She's saying, fuck that. She's saying we get to leave even if we don't have it all figured out yet. So even if we don't know exactly the roadmap of what abolition is going to look like, we can still do better than our current system. We can still get to leave this abusive relationship that we have with police and prisons. We still get to move into a different world where we can try something else. We may not know exactly what it is going to look like, but we know it will look better than shooting someone 7 times in the back as they did with Jacob Blake. We know it will look better than the way that they killed Fred Hampton and Breonna Taylor in their sleep. We know we can do better than our current system. So let us try it. Now is the time to start to live it. And as I say, people are already starting to live abolitionist lives. They're already building work that decreases our reliance on the state. So there are transformative justice practices being in place. There are training and education programs for children on conflict resolution. There are community care networks that are spreading. There are people working on housing. There's all of these ways that we're trying to start to build these abolitionist communities. And that's the work of right now is reimagining and starting to figure out, well, what will this look like? I'm not worried about whether or not we're going to water the right seeds or the wrong seeds, because at this point, we are, Octavia said we had to touch change. She said we had to shape change. So as these seeds grow, we can tend them. We can cut off branches that aren't growing in the way that we want them to. We can continue to water them. We can try out we can transplant and move them around. We can be agile as gardeners if we just want to continue this metaphor. We can take these plants and we can grow them in the way that we need them to grow in order to build the kind of world that we want to build. So the way of ensuring that what is planted grows in the right direction is for all of us to get involved in tending to it. So this is a moment to get involved in activism. This is a moment to get involved in organizing. And we know as disabled people, organizing doesn't look always like being out in the streets. So many of us, that's never going to be an option. So we can organize from our beds. We can organize from our homes. We can do this work of getting involved and saying, hey, no revolution without us, right? And we can do the work of starting to imagine the kind of communities that we want to live in and starting to build it. But as Vivian Salahana says, we need not have an exact roadmap before we get to leave this violent system that we're in. We can do better than this for our children. We can do better than this for our great-grandchildren.
Thank you for that. And I just have 2 more questions for both of you. I'm hoping to hear about what are some of the immediate challenges that you're taking on in your work.
With organizing with Black Lives Matter Canada, we are, really trying to figure out how to do some mutual aid work to support our communities, because Black folks all across this north part of Turtle Island have been disproportionately affected by COVID, disproportionately affected by the economic realities of COVID. And of course are the ones who are getting sicker and experiencing these worst cases here in Canada. So we're working on mutual aid and trying to, again, which comes out of disability justice communities. Hello, we're learning from disability communities every day. And I think that more folks need to recognize that. But anyways, growing out of disability justice work, we're really working on mutual aid and sort of thinking through what that can look like. And then again, supporting Black disabled artists, supporting Black disabled artists to do their creative work. So we launched this Black Arts Fellowship, which is this 20-month fellowship, and we're, working with all of these different artists that are trying to bridge deaf and hearing arts communities. And we're trying to undo that. So I'm really looking forward to doing that work and to supporting these creatives to start doing things in a new way, which is part of building this world that we're trying to live in. So
wonderful. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Keep it up. I can't wait to hear more about that. So for me, number one is, of course, COVID and how that works out in the policy and implementation of all things, right? The way in which disabled people are being treated, treatment rationing needs to end and cease. And so moving that forward, unfortunately, the number of people who are in congregate settings, who all public health officials, no matter what you believe in public health, have said, get those people out of those congregate settings. Congregate settings are nursing homes, mental health institutions, juvenile institutions, all jails, prisons, detention centers. We want them out, and I keep pushing that and keep putting that forward. Every time I talk to congressional people, I have a conversation once a week around that. We're having town hall meetings around policing and law enforcement. Is millions of people were out on the streets around the world for months during a pandemic saying, stop killing people. And Congress has yet in the United States to create a law or a bill to go to be a law that does that. As I said, I was the author with Breon Wells, the president and CEO of the Daniel Initiative, of a letter to Congress saying we oppose this bill to the House. It just passed in the House, unfortunately, because it was weak. It did not do any of the things that people put out there. I refuse to call it the George Floyd bill because it doesn't end chokeholds. All it does is give an incentive for chokeholds, meaning that it says if a state passes a law that there will be no chokeholds in the state, which Illinois actually just did on its own, but most states won't. Then they will not. If they do it, they will receive DOJ funding. If they don't do it, they won't receive DOJ funding. And just so people know, lots of jurisdictions say, yeah, you know what? We don't need the funding. They won't do it. Or they sit and say, well, you know what? We're still investigating that. We don't know if it was actual chokehold. And so DOJ just continues to send the money. The burn, it's called burn money and cops funding, right? Community oriented, right? Funding, really. So it just goes anyway. The money just keeps flowing. So that bill didn't stop. It did not eliminate chokeholds. It incentivized chokeholds. That bill also did not end the Bivens statute. It didn't give a statute remedy to Bivens case. And what that says is that these actions you have can't go against any law enforcement officer who's receiving federal funds. Now, people look at local law enforcement all the time because that is what we know in our cities and our districts. But let me be very clear that if you live in rural areas, it's usually a sheriff or a state police officer or a county police officer. Those people are paid through federal funding. So they will not be covered under any of this part of this bill because they're not local law enforcement, right? So that also means, right, U.S. Parks Police, right? FBI, CIA, DEA, AFT, right? And corrections officers, right? And if you live in certain areas of this country, you come in contact with all of those. Here in DC, every last one of those I just mentioned is here. I'm living in a police state now because the Capitol is surrounded by 2,500 armed soldiers are still here in the district. People need to understand that. Another part of this policing bill, the misconduct database. Oh, they got a misconduct database. No, it isn't. It is one for use of force and racial profiling, which are two high bars to actually prove. As if a police officer is going to come in and say, hey, Sarge, racial profile today, put me in that database. That is not going to happen. And you can't, it's very hard to do that, right? That bill is a 47% bill. We want a 90-something% bill. We want some serious changes to occur. We want accountability. And it is time for Congress to actually sit down with all of these very, active people who went and put their lives on the line, who are still putting their lives on the line by activating and saying, stop killing us. And then we want some policies that say, hold these police officers accountable and let us move toward what Syrus and everyone is saying towards abolitionism and towards ending this. JPA, the Justice and Policing Act that just passed in the House, does not do that. And also the process by which it was done. They did it in a closed process. There was no room for amendments. So all these new members like Cori Bush, who was abolitionist fighter from Missouri, right? Like Mondari Jones and Bowman and Torres from New York, who are new members, got to say nothing on this bill. They were voted in because of defund the police. They were voted in to do something around policing. And Nancy Pelosi and the leadership closed that bill and said, no, you can't make any changes. This is not how Black people want to be treated when it comes to us putting our lives on the line. That's why I say from the streets to the suites. The streets told me that bill's not good enough. So I told Congress that bill's not good enough.
So this is our last question. What is something that is being said but remains unheard? Something that either you're continually saying and not being heard, or things that you hear in your walkabout that's being said but remains unheard.
As I think Syrus said it beautifully, and Dr. Vivian says it beautifully, as they said, well, what are the solutions? You guys don't know what you're talking about, but we're not being heard that we do know what we're talking about, and that we do have solutions, and that it's just not being said. You're not hearing what you want to hear, right? And that we believe in the realm of possibilities. And when you believe in the realm of possibilities, those are some things you just have not seen, right? I'm quite sure nobody told Steve Jobs that one day he was going to create a machine that we was all going to hold in our hand, and I can call, Mexico and every other country in the world. Dream of possibilities. So I say that. And then also, I am very sick of hearing people telling me, we keep saying Black disabled lives are different, and Black disabled people are leaders and powerful people, but it's not being heard. It's not being heard not only in the disability rights community, but it's not being heard in civil rights communities, in LGBTQ civil rights communities. And I don't hear that. And I'm tired of that. I'm tired of those voices being ignored. But at the same time, I'm loving the fact that they don't care. That they just keep on doing what they need to do and just roll right over these other people. But it is annoying that it's not being heard. And we're constantly being told that things have changed. Yes, things have changed. And I hope, as Syrus says, right, we continue this, that the revolution is continuous. But I just constantly hear the same things being done over, same papers written, and I have to go and put, well, what about disabilities in it? What about accessibility? What about, right? And so we're still not being heard, but they're still being heard, if that makes sense, in a different way.
I think, what you're saying is exactly it. I think that, there's still folks that don't get that disability justice is where it's at, is where the revolution, it's not the revolution if disabled people aren't involved. Like, it's absolutely not. And for the folks who can talk about organizing or talk about movement building, but not talk about disability justice, I got to tell you, you ain't getting it right. You ain't getting it right. If you're not talking about mad justice, if you're not talking about disability justice, I'm sorry, but you kind of need to take a step aside, and make some room, because you're not getting it right. So, that's something I wish more people could get, is that if there isn't disabled leadership and mad leadership and deaf leadership in your organization, if your marches and rallies aren't centering disability justice, you ain't doing it right. You're not doing it right. And that's not the future that we're headed towards. The future that we're headed towards is going to be radically different. We are going to dismantle white supremacy and therefore necessarily dismantle ableism. That is the future that we are headed towards. We will stop at nothing less than that. Our children deserve that. Our great-grandchildren deserve that. Our ancestors deserve that, to finally be able to rest because their work will be complete. So we're coming for you, So please, please, please recognize and realize that you need to be centering DJ in your work. In order for it to be better, in order for it to be fuller, in order for it to do the work that we're actually trying to do to build this world that is going to allow for us all to thrive, where we're going to be so much freer. So that's one thing I would really hope that I wish that was more amplified. And then the other thing I would hope that people realize is that, it is not a moment to wait and see, am I going to get involved? Now is a moment to get involved. In the pendulum swing of change, or if you want to look at it at a panarchy cycle, or those ideas of systems change where systems grow and also collapse, we are in a moment of collapse and change where we're planting the seeds of what's growing next. So we need everybody. We literally need everybody to help us push that final swing of the pendulum, to another position. We need to push for this last bit as we reorganize and go into something else that we're going to grow. So we really do need everybody to get involved. And I think that, that's not a new idea that I'm saying. I mean, Fannie Lou Hamer said in the 1960s, she said, if people are wondering, am I going to get in the mess? And she said, honey, if you were born in America with a black face, you were born in the mess, right? So let's do this. Get involved. Now is a moment to get involved with your community, get involved with educating yourself, get involved with learning. If you're not from disability, deaf, and mad communities, find out more about, do the homework, learn about us, learn about what we're fighting for, learn about what disability justice is and could look like, learn about how to center it in your work, do the work, do the homework. But no matter who you are, now is a moment to get involved. And I hope that people realize that. Octavia Butler said to touch change. Well, we're touching it. We're shaping it right now. So let's all put our ourselves and our energies around what we're shaping and build something beautiful for all of us.
Well, thank you. I will say that I have been slow to abolition. I have been slow to disability justice, and I am so grateful for the gardens that you all are sowing, and I hope to be a fellow gardener going forward. Thank you for listening. For more conversations like this one, visit forageorganizing.org. We'll see you on Twitter at Forage Organizing. For more information on Black Visions, visit blackvisionsmn.org or follow them on Twitter at blackvisionsmn. You can find more information on Liberation in a Generation at liberationinageneration.org or follow them on Twitter at liberationin. Thank you to Nino Fernandez for post-production audio and editing. And thanks to all of you for listening. Take care and stay safe, everyone.